I moved up in stakes to 5, 10, 20, no limit hold'em, and over the course of 17 days, went on the biggest downswing of my life. Make sure you stick around to the end of the vlog to see how bad the damage actually was. Let's get into it.
Hey YouTube.
G'day poker people, it's been a minute and we've got a lot to catch up on, like a lot, including the biggest downswing of my poker career ever. In the previous vlog that was about 5 months ago, I went to a new game that was a 5, 10, 20, and the truth is, I didn't just shot take this game one time. I know. Over the coming weeks, I decided to grind this game hard. I mean, with such a big win at first, I thought, maybe I'll be able to keep that thing going. Not quite. Things did start off great with that 4.6k win, but unfortunately, the success didn't quite last that long. In fact, at the very next session, I showed up, ended up losing 5k in that game, which really isn't that big of a loss in a game when you're buying in for 2k. You know, 2.5 buy-in losses, they happen in poker. So I wasn't really that concerned to begin with, but the next session is where things really started to go off the rails. Not only was this game a 5, 10, 20 game, but in addition to that, almost all of these games played with the small blind bounty on. We'd add $50 every single hand. Needless to say, this was a hyper aggressive game with so much incentive to play out of the small blind. I mean, if just like one orbit where no one won out of the small blind, it would already be $400 in the small blind bounty. After 2 orbits, it'd be like 800. And at that point, people are just going all in with their $2,000 stacks. I mean, they have to, just to try and play to win the whole thing. Needless to say, it was crazy. Like this one hand where $250 was on the small blind bounty, a loose aggressive low jack goes ahead and limps, a loose aggressive cutoff goes ahead and raises it up to 80, and then I'm in the small blind with pocket jacks. I go ahead and 3-bet it to 300, trying to squeeze and win that small blind bounty. But even if I do go action, I have jacks, that's fine. So the low jack calls my 3-bet, and then the cutoff goes ahead and 4-bets it to 1,100. We started with about 2k effective, and with so much incentive to win the small blind bounty, I know that the cutoff's going to call off my shove light, so have to rip it all in here, no questions asked with the pocket jacks. It's what I do. I rip it all in, the low jack folds, and then the cutoff calls with aces. Got stacked there, didn't get there, unfortunately. And this is just sort of like a demonstration of how aggressive these games played and how bad the swings really were. Because stuff like this happened all the time in this game. There was no way around it. And unfortunately, I was on the bad side of some pre-flop craziness and ended up losing $8,000. Yeah, 4 buy-ins is a lot to lose in one game, but you can see why. With so much crazy action happening pre-flop, it's bound to happen. And maybe since I'm not used to playing games this big anyway, particularly ones with higher variance, this probably would have been a good spot for me to just like chill out, not play this game for a bit, move back down in stakes. But no, that's not what I did. I was on tilt and I wanted to chase those losses. So less than 24 hours later, I was back at the same game, buying in for another 2k, and this is the point where the tilt did start to seep in for me a bit, and it really did affect my play, which of course just made the situation go from bad to worse. And actually, I think in this session in particular, I played some of the spewiest poker I've ever played. I'll just give you a little bit of a hand history for an example of just how degenerate this thing got. So there was about $100 on the small blind bounty, and then a loose aggressive low jack opens it to 50, then another loose aggressive player in the hijack goes ahead and 3-bets it to 175. Then I'm in the small blind, pocket queens, seems like a great hand to have when you got the small blind bounty on. Well, I go ahead and 4-bet it to 420, and then the action folds back to the hijack 3-better who throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of ace 8-3 rainbow. The action's on me, and I think this is a good spot to have a range bet. I'm going to have a lot of ace-x hands, so I go ahead and bet 125, and then the hijack calls. So we see the turn, which is the 2 of hearts. I think it's a mandatory check in this spot. I'm actually going to start checking a lot of my ace-x hands here too. So definitely want to start checking some of the weaker hands, like pocket queens. I check it over to the loose aggressive opponent who goes ahead and bets 400. We have about 1.3k left in the stack, and this is a pretty no-brainer fold, particularly when I'm going in with the assumption that I'm going to be checking a lot of my ace-x hands on the turn. Yeah, I'm not really ever just going to check call here. I think with queens, it's a pretty no-brainer check fold. I decided to rip it all in. Yeah, this is absolutely awful play, literally 100% total spew. I felt like tilt entitled to winning this pot because I had queens in the small blind, but like I explained, my opponent can have ace jack, ace queen, they could have flopped a set, a weird gut shot like 5-4 got there, but also ace 2, 2-3. I just lose to so much, and like I said, if I want to bluff catch, I have so many better ace x hands in my range. But I ripped it in here, absolute spew rip. Like, what am I even doing? Come on. But anyway, I rip it for 1.3k, and then the opponent does call with 5-4. So we're actually drawing completely dead. Like, even our set outs are no good. And there goes one buy-in, and it really does go to show just how spewing awful I was playing when I was on tilt. Like, what am I even doing here? Jesus. So needless to say, I did have another losing session, down another 3.3 thousand, bringing the total cumulative loss so far to 16,300. This is already pretty bad. The longest losing stretch that I've had prior to this was about 10,000. So needless to say, things started to sting, and I wasn't exactly going off tilt at this point. And like, really, whenever that happens to you as a poker player, absolutely 100% move down in stakes, or even just stop playing for a little bit. Probably a good option as well. I didn't really do either of those things though. Again, just in a total degenerate mindset of let's chase my losses, which is just awful fishy thinking. But I was back in on a Friday night, 2 days later, back in the action for another 2,000. And I will say, even though I do think I should have stopped playing at this point, it was 150 on the small blind bounty, and I'm in the hijack with ace-5 of clubs. I go ahead and raise it up to 60, and then a tight aggressive cutoff calls, a loose aggressive small blind, and a tight aggressive straddle. So we go 4 ways to a flop, 7-3 deuce with 2 spades and 1 diamond. So we do have a gut shot, but not much else. And then the loose aggressive player from the small blind decides to lead out for 125. The action folds back to me. Being that we are in position and we do have a gut shot, I do think it's a pretty good spot to call. So much incentive for the small blind to bluff. So even if they were leading out with something like Jack 10, I wouldn't be that surprised. And we're going to be ahead of most of their flush draws as well. So I throw in the call, and we do get to see a turn, which is the ace of hearts. Pretty good turn, all things considered. And then the small blind keeps betting. They go ahead and make it 300. A little bit concerned. We do lose to a lot of stuff here. Basically all of the ace x2 pairs, and 5-4 got there again. But I don't think we can fold when we do turn top pair. And like I said, my opponent could be just absolutely spew bluffing, and all their spade draws we're going to be ahead of. So I do throw in the call, and we get to see a river, which is the 9 of clubs. Then the small blind goes ahead and bets 600. We do lose to a lot on this board, and it really would have to be kind of an airball bluff or a missed flush draw that the opponent bet 3 streets with. There is an incentive for the small blind to take a more aggressive line with the small blind bounty on, but being that it's only 150 and the pot's already over 1,000 at this point, kind of makes me think that they're not going to be quite as aggressive. Let me know what you guys would do down in the comments below, whether you would call or fold. I decided to call here. A loose aggressive opponent trying to win a small blind bounty kind of inclines me to believe that they might be bluffing. Unfortunately, the opponent does show us 7-2 of clubs, and they end up winning the small blind bounty, as well as a bunch of my stack. Damn. So like, I'm not really mad with my play in that hand. I do think I'm going to need to call down with a lot of ace-x, but it's just another big pot I lost, and another losing session. I ended up losing 1,700. Even though I do think I was starting to play a bit better, I really was just like devo from all the losses, and I did actually decide to take 5 days off at this point, which I think was a really, really good idea, to be honest. I think it might have been better if I did move down in stakes, but again, I was playing in the same game again, and unfortunately, I wasn't playing much better. I ended up losing 2.6 thousand one session, and then 900 the next day, which brung my cumulative loss to 21,500. Keep in mind, my biggest downswing prior to this was 10,000, so this was pretty brutal. But I sort of got to a point in my own head where I thought, well, I'm not just like losing 8,000, 5,000 here and there. Like, these losses are a lot smaller, and this might be kind of backwards logic, but the fact that I was losing a lot smaller over these 2 sessions really did fuel my confidence, or perhaps delusion, that I could beat these games if I just put in the volume and wrote out the variance. So you can see where this is going. Next day, I was back in it yet again, buying in for another 2k and feeling a bit more confident this time at least. So there's 200 on the small blind bounty. I'm in the cutoff with queen jack of clubs. I open it to 60, then a loose aggressive button, 3 bets it to 225. The action folds back to me. Could go with any 3 options here. Ultimately, I do decide to call against a loose aggressive opponent. Maybe folding is a better play. Really could go with any 3 of the options though. So we do see a flop, which is king 10-4 with 2 clubs and 1 spade. Pretty good flop for us. I check it over to the opponent, who goes ahead and bets 250. Keep in mind, I said my opponent was loose aggressive, so I think they're going to be 3 betting with a lot of like ace-x, ace-jack, and ace-10. And even if they bet queens or jacks here, I wouldn't be shocked, and I really think we should attack that range. So I do go ahead and check raise it to 700, trying to represent basically king 10 or better. And then the opponent thinks a little bit and throws in the call. So we do see a turn, which is the 10 of hearts. Pretty awful turn for us. It's going to be a lot harder for us to credibly represent pocket 10s or king 10 suited. But having said that, if we were going to have a bluff in this spot, this would be a pretty good hand to use. It does unblock a lot of club jobs. I think this would probably be a really good spot to just give up with the hand and just see if we can get a free river if it does go check check. I ripped it all in though for 1.3 thousand. Really kicking myself for this play. I think my opponent's going to have a lot of king X that just aren't going to fold. And then my opponent hits the tank. They're in the tank probably a good minute or so. And then they throw in the call. Ugh. And then they end up showing pocket queens. So we couldn't even fold our opponent off a bullshit hand, let alone like a king jack plus. So that was pretty rough to see, but we do have outs until the river's a repeat 4. So yeah, we're not going to get there, and the opponent's going to stack us again. And believe me, this absolutely wiped out any confidence / delusion that I had from the previous sessions. I was down another 4,925, and you can really tell how on tilt I was. I didn't even tip the dealer that extra 25. That might be the most embarrassing part of this whole vlog, to be honest. But of course, I went in the next day. Of course, I lost again by 1,150, bringing my total losses up to, I don't even know at this point, but it's a lot. And like at this point, I absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, 100% should not have been playing this game. I should have moved back down in stakes and just like tried to get my confidence back. Like even if I did have the ability to beat this game, I was so tilted out of my mind that I actually was having no chance. I was probably the biggest fish in the game. But you guys can probably already figure out depths of hell opened up even deeper. I was back at it again the next day, buying in for 2k. Again, on monkey tilt, again. This is the very first hand from that next session. There's 100 on the small blind bounty, and a loose aggressive cutoff opens to 60. Loose aggressive small blind calls, and I'm in the straddle with ace queen of hearts. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 300. Really want to use a larger size here, just expecting the small blind to call a lot, and then the cutoff calls and the small blind folds. Kind of like nut low scenario. But we go heads up to a flop of king 9-4 rainbow with the king of hearts, 3-betting out of the straddle on a king high board. We're gonna have a lot of ace king, king jack, and king queen. We would want to bet those with some bluffs. I think ace queen with the backdoor royal flush draw, probably a high equity bluff that you'd like to use. So I go ahead and bet 180, and then the cutoff throws in the call. So it heads up to a turn which is the king of clubs. Actually a pretty good turn for us. It makes it a lot less likely the opponent did have a top pair hand. The SPR is about 1.5. If I'm gonna bluff here, all in is really the only move to make. I mean, I could bet like a third of the pot and then shove the river, but like, what's the point? I'm never going to do that if I have king queen or ace king. I think I'm either going to check those or rip them all in. So when I've got a bluff, it makes sense to use the all-in sizing. I do think that logic is sound. I don't think ace queen of hearts is the right hand to use. We actually do have a bit of showdown value. I'd rather bluff with like a jack 10 or a queen 10, stuff that has a gut shot, you know, outs to improve, but less showdown value. But I'm on monkey tilt again, so I rip it all in with the overbet bluff, and then the opponent just like snap calls with king 10. I mean, we were always going to lose. A pretty big one there when the opponent does make top pair. Yeah, man, just another big pot, another spewy bluff by us, and you can really tell my headspace was not in it. And like, I really wanted to leave the game after this pretty spewy bluff, but I mean, it was literally my first hand. And even though I've donated to this game for the past 2 weeks straight, it probably would have been a bit rude to leave after just one hand and then just not rebuy. So I did rebuy, and clearly I was still on tilt this session because this one happened a few hours later. There's 150 on the small blind bounty, and a tight aggressive cutoff opens to 60. I'm on the button with ace 10 offsuit. This hand I don't really like to have in my 3-bet range, particularly against a tighter cutoff. We're probably opening a bit tighter, and that will be the sound logic I would use if I was on my A game, but I'm on monkey tilt, so I 3-bet it to 200. Absolutely fishy play. Don't do this, especially when you're on tilt. And then the cutoff calls. So it heads up to a flop of ace 10-4 rainbow. Hey, let's go. The opponent checks it over to me. I go ahead and c-bet 150 for value will be the term I would like to use, and then the cutoff calls. So we do get to see a turn, which is 9 hearts putting out backdoor hearts. When the opponent checks it over to me, I go ahead and bet 500. Then the opponent rips it all in for 1,950. A little bit concerned that the opponent could have set mine pre-flop with 10s or 4s, but can't be folding. Then of course I can have like ace 9 suited or ace 4 suited. So I do throw in the call, and then the opponent shows pocket 4s. Ugh. So not only am I copying it from just like playing awful and spewing off, but even when I do get it in with a good hand, it's not as good as my opponent's. The river's no help. It's a king of hearts, and we lose yet another pot. So yeah, like I did run bad there and get cooled pretty awfully, but at the same time, I put myself in that position with a pretty spewy 3-bet. And really, looking back, I just should have absolutely left at this point. I've just been spewy this whole session. I guess I had in my head that like I look so aggressive that like I'm probably going to get paid off if I ever do have a good hand, which is true, but at the same time, like I'm on tilt and I should have left. I didn't know, because we've got another hand, and this hand is with a familiar face to the vlog, Mr. Chow. So the small blind bounty has 300 on it. I'm in the cutoff with ace king. I go ahead and raise it up to 70, using a bit of a larger open size when there is more money on the small blind bounty. Of course, I'm going to be doing it with a little bit of a tighter range than I typically would open from the cutoff. Ace king, pretty safely in that range. I go ahead and open it up up to 70. And then the small blind goes ahead and chucks in the 3-bet. They go ahead and make it 200. The action gets back to me, and I think it's a slam dunk 4-bet spot here with a hand this strong against what likely is a very loose small blind 3-betting range, not only with the bounty but also being that's Mr. Chow. So I go ahead and 4-bet it to a 500, and the small blind tanks a bit, stares me down, shuffles his chips, then slides them in the middle and calls. So we're heads up to a flop of ace 8-4 with 2 hearts, and then the small blind goes ahead and leads out for 400. The effective stack is about 1.5k here, so I think there's absolutely nothing to do but rip it all in here, try and stack a worse ace. I'll get a call from a flush draw, so I rip it all in, and then the small blind gives me the same stare down he did pre-flop, shuffles his chips, and then is like, whatever, I call. So another 4k pot, and the opponent shows 9-6 of hearts, so we're against a flush draw. The turns are 4 of clubs, and then the river, jack of hearts. God damn it. We lose yet another big one, and this was at the point I finally threw in the towel and decided to leave in the session, and I'd lost $10,000. By far my biggest loss ever, which brung my downswing total to $37,575. Keep in mind that my biggest downswing prior to this was $10,000. Like, this is an absolute disaster, and it really stung. So at this point, I caught up to where I probably should have been about a week ago, and I did decide to move down in stakes. The next night, I went to play a 1-3-6 game, where I actually won 950, thus ending my downswing and the 17 days of hell. And it felt so good to finally book a win at poker. Like, I try not to be results oriented and getting my emotions and my feels, but I failed pretty epically at that over the course of those 17 days, and I definitely think that contributed to why the downswing amount was so much. But listen, those 17 days of torment happened almost half a year ago, and believe me, a lot has happened since then, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get my next vlog where it comes out to see how I bounce back for this, if I even did bounce back from this. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.